Welcome to Q America with Star Parker. As you can see, I am not Star Parker. I am the newest member of Q's executive team. I'm Minister Donald Eason, and I have a great panel here with us today. We have to my left, we have Jonathan Alexander, member of the Liberty Counsel, attorney with Liberty Counsel. We have Richard Manning, president of Americans for Limited Government, and to my right, to my far right, we have Marty. I always pronounce your last name.
Dannenfelser.
Dannenfelser, Marty Dannenfelser, the Vice President from Government Relations here at CURE, and then Christian Allman, the President of Eagle Forum. And we have a great discussion for you this morning. We're going to be talking about the economics of our country, some of the policy changes that will likely happen when President Trump takes office. And before we get to our discussion with our panel this morning, we're going to break away to Star Parker with Anthony Campo of the Economic Policy Innovation Center, who will be discussing some regulatory policies and how they affect us and affect our economy.
I want to introduce you to my new friend. As you know, in this segment, the boutique segment, I like to show you different work, the behind the scenes of Washington, D.C. So I have Anthony Campo. And Anthony, your resume is incredibly impressive. For a young man, too, I'm like, okay, I have to get out my dictionary and figure out how to even say some of these words of what you do. Welcome to Cure America.
Thank you so much, Star. It's wonderful. It's a privilege to be here with you.
Now, where are you from? Tell me about yourself and how you ended up here in what many call the swamp.
Yeah, I'm from the country in Michigan, out in a small town. The little town next door I grew up has 700 people.
Oh, wow.
And I grew up in a big family, and most of them are still there in the area.
Wow.
And I went to a little Christian college in Florida called Southeastern, where you were my commencement speaker. So thank you. I said it's great to be here and meet you in person.
That
finally.
is incredible.
I was in the nosebleeds before. It's wonderful to be here and meet you.
Oh, my.
We love your work, and it's great to be on with you today.
Oh, that's amazing, because I left the campuses maybe 5-7 years ago after being on more than 300 college campuses. And as we look at the news today, I'm like, okay, Lord, thank you for moving me on. Yeah. But it's good to know that those that are Christian, I did do a few of the Christian schools, remember, and are producing people like yourself. It's just incredible, because you're a fellow in regulatory modernization and alignment at the Economic Policy Innovation Center, EPIC. Remember, guys, I introduced you to EPIC once before, because they're one of the policy institutes here that does incredible work. You work specifically now in the regulatory area. Your resume, you help lead interagency collaborations on a range of technical regulatory matters, contributed to international regulatory cooperative activities, and help strengthen and enforce federal information policy standards. This is really behind the scenes.
Right.
Tell us, okay, give us insight of how you got into this field and what exactly is it that you do?
Well, so I'm mentioning, just back up a little bit more. So in college, I grew up in a kind of conservative home and Christian home. And then when I went to college, I actually became a little bit of a man of the left for a while. And in my last year of college, I was studying abroad in Oxford, and I went there to prove Adam Smith wrong definitively, the father of capitalism. I thought, if I can prove him wrong, then I'll prevail as a man of the left. And I got converted in that process, sort of intellectually. And I found that Adam Smith was not just some cold-hearted capitalist. He was actually a moral philosopher, and he wrote another book called The Theory of Moral Sentiments, and a lot of his ideas about the proper functioning of the economy and the legal system were based on ideas about morality and the moral foundation of society, and particularly morality that was grounded in the Judeo-Christian tradition in the West was what he focused on. So that was a big part of my kind of change in my ideas. And so I came here to work at the Heritage Foundation, a conservative organization, afterwards.
But back up, but were you studying regulatory and economic matters at the time that made you decide that I'm going to find the science behind faith, or pretend that faith doesn't exist and only find the science?
Well, I think like a lot of college students, I was really looking for what was true and right and good. And I think that I was really latching onto it there, and I wanted to lean into it. And then I came here and I was at Heritage, and I was working on a wide range of issues. And while I was there, I realized that the regulatory process is really key. Because when we talk about changing policy, we always think about Congress. Congress is really important, of course. One of the things that I discovered in my time being here and evaluating the situation is that what happened for a long time is that Congress would pass laws. They'd say, we want to accomplish some general objective, and then they would give the power over to the agency, to whatever that agency is, to figure out the details. You figure out how to solve whatever this problem is in a more particular way.
And in a really good functioning governmental system, it's not a bad idea. I think the regulatory, the agencies and the departments left the founding principles, and so it's expanded government in places that it shouldn't go. Yeah. I don't know that the process needs to be just totally overhauled. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, so our Constitution, we set up 3 branches of the federal government, each which are supposed to do different things, right? Specific things. The president's supposed to enforce the law. Congress is supposed to make the law. The judiciary is supposed to interpret the law. And what's happened is, and we read this in the Federalist Papers, and Alexis de Tocqueville talked about this in his survey of America in the early days, that if we have all of those powers combined in any one person or branch or group, then you have tyranny. And that's why a lot of people left to come here, so they could get away from that. And that is what we want to have again. But today, in our executive branch, all these agencies, what you have is a blending of all of those powers. So you have the lawmaking power has been given to those agencies. They enforce that law. Once they write the rules, they enforce it. And then after they enforce it, they bring you into an in-house court. They have their own judges within the agency. So we have a real blending of the powers, which is not really what the founders intended.
And so a major overreach.
So a big part of what as I was here and working, I was evaluating all this, and I thought the regulatory process is this thing that's super bureaucratic, and a lot of people don't seem to understand it, but it seems to be extremely important. It's where a lot of the rubber meets the road on
the
policy.
Rulemaking. Well, we're seeing it now. I mean, the Biden administration, because they feel that they may have their last opportunity to make all of the changes that they want, or overreaching in this regulatory areas. And like you're mentioning, I don't know of one agency that's not sick. The one department that's now not sick, that the liberal ideas are embedded, and they think that they have all power and exclusive overreach objectives, and they can get away with it, and they do get away with it. So I want to ask you, because you served as a core member of the regulatory reform team for the 2016 presidential transition team, and you were a member of the beachhead team at OMB, OIRA. What in the world are these agencies? People are probably wondering, okay, tell me what we need to be thinking about to reverse this that you just discussed, that you just showed us, that Congress has removed itself from its core responsibility, given all that power over to these agencies and the bureaucracy of Washington, and they are not accountable to anyone.
Yeah, so you mentioned there at the beginning was the transition team. So I worked on the transition team for President Trump in 2016.
What does that mean? Like, what were you guys doing? Because there's talk about it right now. People are saying, okay, so how is President Trump going to return and get things done? There's much discussion. So they don't understand that this transition team effort, and that there are a lot of people, bright people like yourself, involved in helping shape the administrative policies.
So what happened there is, it's basically a big group of conservative people who are helping. They help the president to prepare to take over the government, right? And so there were hundreds of us working across every area of policy, and kind of what I focus on is the cross-cutting stuff. So regulations is kind of like laws. Like laws cover all kinds of policy areas. Regulations cover all kinds of policy areas. And so I've kind of focused on the regulatory process, which cuts across all the policy domains. So that was the key team that I was on, working with the policy experts in each area to help to develop a suite of regulatory reforms that cut across the government, and some really big ones. I mean, I mentioned this in a congressional testimony last year, but was a lot of our ideas, actually, a lot of what President Trump did was he took some of the best ideas that had been out there for a while, that were well established, that people on kind of all across the philosophical spectrum had said, yes, we like that, we agree with it, but we never actually did it. Nobody ever really did it. And President Trump did that. And so you see that in a lot of the regulatory reforms. We took ideas that were recommendations from the American Bar Association, the Administrative Conference of the United States, these distinguished bodies with people, like I said, that represent kind of all parts of the philosophical spectrum, had said, we think we should have more transparency in the regulatory process. We should have more public engagement in the regulatory process. We shouldn't just have, rule by edict from Washington.
Right.
We should have a robust engagement with the public to come up with the best standards. And so President Trump took a lot of that and he advanced it. No regulating through guidance. So that's a big problem that we've had in Washington. There's a whole, we're supposed to change policy through laws, regulations maybe to provide some fine details, but what we've had in the last few years, and I'm concerned we'll have a lot more of it in the future, is regulating through blogs and speeches and guidance things that aren't even, there's really no serious process around it. And President Trump said, we're not doing that.
Well, and I don't mean to cut you off a bit, and I'm glad that he did say that. And I remember that even in rulemaking, he was, look, for every new thing you do, take away two.
Yeah.
But we're seeing it now, this overreach, especially when people have agendas like this environmental push, this climate change agenda that is now seeping into every single agency and department here in Washington. It needs to be stopped. Okay, so when you were over at OMB, what does that mean? Like, what did you do?
Yeah. So after on the transition team, we helped to prepare, help support the president's work on developing executive orders and guidances and all that kind of stuff. And then I went to OMB. So OMB is an office within the White House. It's an agency within the executive office of the president that is in charge of budget policy for the government, management policy for the government, and regulatory policy for the government. And I worked on the regulatory side. So it's basically an oversight agency within the White House that helps to manage the regulatory policy and process for all of the agencies that report into the president. So,
no, I know that people think I didn't follow any of that, and I'm hoping that that it makes. I just trust him, so I'm gonna believe that we are going to be okay as a nation. Now you're over at Epic, and you're working on some incredible things. You showed me in your book that you even have a chart that will help people follow through.
Yeah.
So we only have a minute or so. What is it that we can break this down to fifth grade level? What is it that we can be thinking about as we're in this election year, and how important it is for people to understand the differences between these administrative approaches? What we've heard from the main media is we're going to focus you 100% on the personality of Donald Trump. We're going to pretend that there is no personality of President Biden, and some people do think that there really isn't a personality of President Biden. But there are policy differences in these two administrations.
Yes, Star, I want to say, when you mentioned the 2-for-1 program that the president put in place, that program, part of what it did was every year, if you look at the growth of regulatory costs on the public, it grows by billions and billions of dollars every year. When we looked at the first 2 years of the Obama administration, it was almost $300 billion of regulatory costs added in those first couple of years.
$300 billion of added regulatory costs, just things that we don't even know what they are and what they were regulating. You just find out that you have limited product at the store now.
That's
or
right.
the price is doubled on something that you normally have to buy, like your refrigerator or your new washing machine.
That's right. Right now it's almost 500, but 470 billion so far in the Biden administration. But what you saw when President Trump got elected was that rather than going, the records of my agency every year, the costs increase. When President Trump got elected, they went down through the x-axis into negative territory, the total regulatory costs. So for the first time in our records, the government actually imposed less than $0 in regulatory costs. We actually saved hundreds of billions of dollars in regulatory costs on the public for the first time in record. So that's the difference. Instead of adding hundreds of billions, you're saving hundreds of billions of dollars of regulatory costs. A professor at University of Chicago just calculated that what that translates to at the end of last year, just the new regulations from the Biden administration, $10,000 per family.
Wow.
In cost. So the impact, real world impact, is $10,000 a year for regular folks in their home every year. That was as the end of last year. So we know that's going to continue to increase.
It would.
So that's the difference. It's hundreds of billions more or less. And again, it cuts across every area of policy. So do you want more aggressive more aggressive requirements. And a lot of his changes, a lot of what we did was say reduce the reporting interval. So we were not even talking about necessarily in some cases changing the standards. We're just saying make it a little bit easier for people to comply with the standards, make it a little bit easier to report on it, so it's not daily reporting.
Right, and we're talking not just about consumer. Business are most affected, I think, from these regulatory changes, and then we see the increase in the costs in that way too. Yeah,
and I'm just talking about the cost side, but basically all of the policies that your viewers care about, they happen through regulation. Yeah. I mean, that's where it touches down, and so you can cut across any area of policy. And so having a president that's serious on those issues, that doesn't just say, okay, well, whatever the government comes up with, I'll support. No, he's taking the best ideas that have been out there. He's got new ideas, combined them in a way that we demonstrated record numbers across the board. And it was an exciting time, and I think...
well, we need to get to that time again. I'll tell you one thing, because the costs are going up. People don't understand why, and it is important that they understand that politics is policy, and people are policy. And there are people behind the scenes that are working on the policies to make our lives a whole lot better. Before I let you go, what is that you have in your little book you showed me?
So
and it's on your website too.
It's on our website, the Economic Policy Innovation Center. There are kind of these one-page documents that help to explain things about the process. So this one is just a one-pager that just kind of walks through and says, these are the steps in the process, and the public can get involved. It's not just something that's happening in Washington. There's an opportunity for the public to submit comments, and they're required by law to respond to them. They can't just ignore it. It's not just like calling a member maybe and they ignore it. This one, they actually have to respond, and so we go through some ways to provide meaningful impact in that process.
For you're like scratching your head like I did. Okay, what's in that? Oh my! They have pictures, but I love that you're saying they can get involved. Let's go to your website and let's make sure that we do make an impact, because that is a part of Washington people don't understand, that it is an activist government when we're involved in it, and it's not just about calling your legislator or going out to vote on election day or during the primaries. It's also about going into the different areas that affect them and letting your voice be heard. So I really thank you for that. But did you say your website?
It's the Economic Policy Innovation Center is the organization's name.
Yeah, but I thought
Epic.org.
Epic.org.
Yeah,
I thought it was something a little more simple than that. Oh, well, I'm going to have Anthony back, of course, especially as we move into this season of election, to make sure that we're focusing on the important things and not just what the evening news tells us is important.
Welcome back. We just heard an informative conversation and interview with Star Parker and Anthony Campo and the regulatory environment and how it affects us. And now we're going to look at some of the policies that affect our economic growth, the policies that have changed, are causing stagnation in our country and really around the world. And as we look at what's going on in not just in our nation, but around the world, we look at countries like Argentina and Italy and how they have rejected liberal policies and elected conservative governments. And of course, we've done the same here in America. We're looking at what we would call common sense economic policies by the election of President Trump. And even if we look at countries like Canada, Justin Trudeau, he is put in this resignation, and we'll probably see a conservative leader take over as prime minister of that country. So with these in mind, I have a question for our panel. What are the common elements and developments for the actions of these new governments like Argentina, Italy, and how can President Trump really and our Congress, the Republican Congress, try to emulate or help work together with these countries and their new conservative policies?
Well, I think economies and certainly economic decisions are downwind from the social decisions. So if you look at how a lot of, you mentioned Italy and Argentina, even Hungary, how a lot of these countries are going socially sort of reflects your economic picture as well. So folks realizing that the family unit is going to be essential for that community and for the country, and that eliminates things like so-called reproductive justice and the LGBT agenda. When that's put away, then you start adopting principles that are good for the family, and then you see economic conservative principles follow right after that. So I think we're seeing a trend socially of these countries becoming more conservative, and as a result, the economic policy follows as well.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan.
Well, one of the things that I think we have to separate out Italy, which is part of the EU, which is a completely different organization that we have to deal with their own set of rules, and Argentina. We have a South America problem. We have a Central America problem. Under Biden, we have effectively lost South America. Bolsonaro got defeated and is being prosecuted by a Chinese plant, essentially, in Brazil. We lost Colombia, which was a big ally right on the border there of Central America. Peru's gone. Ecuador's gone. Chile went left. In fact, China now controls the entire Pacific seaboard of South America as a result of those changes. So Argentina becomes very important because helping the Argentinian government succeed, engaging in trade relations with them in a way that we are uplifting their economy, we are encouraging their economy, we're helping their economy grow. That is essential to rebuilding our base in South America and Central America. And as President Trump talks about the Monroe Doctrine, which asserts that we are not going to allow foreign powers to take over Central or South America, as he reasserts the Monroe Doctrine, Argentina becomes a very important place for us to begin the economic rebirth of South America along free market principles. And that's, I think, a good starting place for the Trump administration to make a major change in the world stage.
Getting back to the economic impacts of even what Jonathan said, but how it affects the family. At Eagle Forum, we focus on how it affects the family. And, one of the big things when Milei took over Argentina and he was taking all those government agencies and ripping them up, people can relate to that. Families can relate to that. And what President Trump, in his first press conference, he's not president yet, but President-elect Trump, said was that, the left, they came in and they wanted to take away your gas heaters and they want to take away your gas stoves. Americans realize that when regulations are kind of up there and out there and hitting other people, we kind of don't feel it. But when they come into our home and tell us how we're going to operate for our family, that's when American families say, nope, and it becomes real. And that's where the Trump administration has this wonderful opportunity to lift the regulations off businesses and off individuals, and we will respond and flourish, I think.
Christian, before you chime in, Marty, do you think that's really what has caused this new populist movement, the populists to go towards conservatives, because they have come into our homes and interfered with our lives?
I do. They have come into our home economically and socially through, drag Queen Story Hour at your local library and books in your schools. They're coming in and trying to touch our families, tell us how to cook our food, heat our homes, educate our children, whether or not we can go to church. And then people just say, no, enough. I want a different option. And they chose Donald Trump to give them that different option, more freedom economically and socially.
And Marty, just listen to what Christian is saying here. How do you see that affecting us economically? Because if they're coming into our homes, that's really affecting us and how we spend our money and how we can spend our money and the prices of goods and services?
Well, it also affects the availability. Sometimes these things that they try to push on us just don't work, but they do drive up the costs. They talk so much about they want to lower the cost of housing, but appliances are part of a housing cost, and when you keep driving up the cost of appliances, that hurts as well. I also wanted to mention something about Canada. That's another one of these countries that seems on the cusp of electing a conservative leader. You have a very onerous government there. We saw the situation during COVID when the truckers were protesting, that they cracked down massively on those truckers. But then we see these pro-Palestinian protesters more recently in Montreal and Ottawa and so on, and they seem to be taking over these cities, large sections of these cities, and the government and the police doing nothing. And you're also seeing this kind of speech code thing going on up there. Not only do they say you can only speak French or put things in French, that's one thing, but they crack down on all this gender stuff and the way you can talk about gender and all kinds of other things that you're allowed to say and not say. And I think that people are recoiling from that, and they're just saying, wait, give us our freedom back. And I think we see that in the United States as well. People getting, told what pronouns they have to use, what kind of things their kids are being taught in school, the whole DEI bureaucracy and so on. And I think there's people are pushing back and saying enough is enough. Let's get back to common sense and treating everyone equally.
Yeah, and you actually mentioned that as well, Alexander, in your comments on the transgenderism and how do you think that really affects this economy moving forward? Because they were pushing a lot of as Marty mentioned, owners' policies. How does that affect our just the family and the whole, as Christian mentioned, the family?
Yeah, so a number of things. If you look at the Biden administration, how they operated, how they're still operating on their way out, from the top on down, it was not a sophisticated administration in terms of these policies being organic to them. This broad reach of government wasn't done with a level of sophistication, really, because I don't think they had the personnel or the smarts to do it. So they would tap into, the European Union, and they tap into, these communistic regimes that have masqueraded themselves in more liberal governments and pulling things like the, Infrastructure Bipartisan Act from UN language and pulling, the so-called reproductive rights from UN language, as well as things with the LGBT. I think the U.S. was probably pushing that more so than some of these other countries. Mm-hmm. But there is a global elite. There is globalism and this idea that world governance has to look a certain way, and it's one-size-fits-all sort of policy. And that has always been very different from American sovereignty. It's always been separate from our values, our ethos, as well as our Constitution. That has always been a buffer against this. So, and we've been able to enjoy that isolationism, both from the rest of the world sort of politics, but also economically. We've been able to maintain through our resources a strong way to support ourselves through energy. But when we're importing these things from the UN and other countries, that's when we see the shift happen in America, where it's no longer our values promoting our social narrative and the trickle-down effect into our economics. So one term that we will hope to see and we hope to encourage is separating ourselves from this big global picture and really operating based on our Constitution and based on what is historic American values.
One of the things that's interesting in this, going back to Mr. Campo's that kind of talk with Starr, the regulatory regime in the United States is set up to be ripped asunder because of Donald Trump's appointments to the court in his first term. There have been a number of court decisions which basically say, if you're a bureaucrat, the courts don't have to give deference to you anymore in terms of your opinion of what should happen, and logic can actually take over, and those regulations can be struck down. They've said a lot of the regulations have gone beyond the intent of Congress. So suddenly Congress can say, pinpoint regulations, say this regulation goes beyond our intent, and can effectively move to end that regulation or restrict the breadth of that regulation. We see, and that provides the administration, the Trump administration, with a unique bit of power. And that's the power to say, we think this regulation, because was ill-conceived, goes beyond the Constitution as defined by the Supreme Court, and we're going to move to strike it down, and perhaps be able to do so without going through the onerous Administrative Procedures Act, which oftentimes takes 2 to 3 years to be able to limit a regulation. So we're in a shifting point right now, and the regulatory regime that's affected so much of America, from what kind of whether we can have a wood stove or not, or a gas stove, that regulatory regime is under attack for the first time in my lifetime. And that is good for freedom in America.
And back to the point of Congress, isn't that what Congress should be doing already anyway? Isn't that their responsibility?
Yeah, absolutely.
It is.
Maybe, and they're more empowered to do so. So hopefully they will step up that with combination of the Trump administration backing them up and working together to really reduce the regulatory burden on this country.
As strange as it may seem, the law for about 40 years has been, Congress was actually cut out of that because of the Chevron case, which Chevron versus NRDC, where Congress said, hey, that's not what we intended. But it didn't matter because the bureaucrats had broad discretion on how to interpret laws, and the bureaucrats were given the absolute power on that by courts from the 1980s. That being stripped away now empowers Congress to actually do their job and be able to direct the administrative branch, the executive branch, on how these laws should be executed. And so now Republicans would like to have a lot more majority in Congress, and that creates a problem. But the fact of the matter is Congress now is dramatically more empowered to actually play a role in how this nation is governed.
Well, thank you. We're going to finish this discussion in our next segment. We're going to talk about that because we, as the people, we elected Congress to represent us, not the administrative state. And when we listen to the idea that was taken away from our congressmen and women to represent we, the people, we're going to talk more about that in our next segment. So thank you, and we'll be back with you soon. Welcome back. We just had a robust discussion about the regulatory state and economy and how it affects us. And when we look at the idea of Congress having its power back and the Trump administration wanting to exercise this, the Biden administration has actually been they're putting some executive orders trying to interrupt what President Trump has promised the people. And so I just have a question of how will these actions that Biden is taking, and what are most of your concerns when President Trump wants to exercise his agenda? However, as Biden is putting these roadblocks in place, what are some of the concerns you have about the different roadblocks he's trying to put in place right now?
Yeah, well, I would say government has a check within that. So the Congressional Review Act allows the incoming administration within 6 months to basically reverse everything that the previous administration does. But they need the consent of Congress. They need Congress to vote in the majority. And so what I think Biden is doing is tipping his hand to the really small majorities that exist in the House and saying, well, if we can push these through, and Congress is dealing in the first 90 days with budget reconciliation and a number of other issues that have to get passed, appropriations, and a number of these things that have to get passed, that maybe they'll ignore some of these regulations. So I think they are, and they have really nothing to lose at this point, so they're sort of playing poker and seeing if the other side is going to sort of catch their bluff and let these things sail through. I think it is up to us, as conservatives that are paying attention in these last weeks, to not let him get away with anything at the congressional level. Another bit of that, just to bring that back to the world stage, there's a lot that can occur at the United Nations that a Biden administration that hasn't been totally favorable about Israel, or in the past has let certain things slide through to affect our ally Israel. Some of those can get through in the United Nations, and if we're not there to object, they'll become resolutions that may affect our greatest ally in the Middle East in the next 6 months. So there's a lot of things that we as conservatives have to keep raising the red flag and alarm on that Biden is trying to do in these last few weeks.
Do you think we will continue to raise the red flag and we will be able to overcome some of these roadblocks that he's putting up? I
think they're going to try to fight them. I think President Trump is determined to fight some of these things that Biden has done on energy development. For instance, he said 625 million acres of offshore area are not going to be open for drilling or oil or gas exploration, which is an outrageous thing to do. And President Trump is saying he's going to reverse that on day one. That he didn't do by regulation, though. He used executive action, I believe, and he interpreted existing law. It may not be as simple as President Trump just coming in and reversing it. It may be that Congress may have to legislate to undo what Biden is doing there. So that perhaps that's something they can look at as far as the budget reconciliation bill or something. That may be another thing they have to put in there if President Trump is not able to. I think we're going to see some cases go to court. Some of these things are going to be legislated. possibly up to the Supreme Court, because, and some of them will be able to be undone. Where there are actual regulatory actions that Biden has taken, they do have the option of the Congressional Review Act, and that would be the best way to undo the regulations that he's done in the last several months. But you have to get a majority in both houses of Congress, and when two of President Trump's people leave to go into the UN and to go into the National Security Council, and Matt Gaetz has already left and he's not there, you're going to have a 217 to 215 Republican to Democrat margin in the House. So Republicans will not be able to lose a single vote in order to pass these things. If one person votes with the Democrats, you lose on a tie vote. So it's going to be difficult. So they're going to have to hold all their people. But there is an option there through the Congressional Review Act if they can hold all their people in place.
So what you're saying, Marty, is the Congress has to actually do their job. If we have a slim majority and we need them to pass legislation, they actually need to do their job. They can't just depend on what I will say the administrative state over, as Rick mentioned, over the last 40 years. We elect them, and they need to do their job to pass these regulations.
Well, they to undo the regulations in the case of what Biden has done. But yeah, they have to do their job, but they have to all agree on how to do their job. And what you get beyond party is sometimes you have regional issues. You have people from agricultural states or people from different types of states have regional issues that don't necessarily coincide with the broader party position on some issues. So, and you have people in the Northeast who have transportation or environmental issues or tax issues that they have different point of view on people in other parts of the country. So it's going to be a challenge to hold them all, and they have to make sure everybody is there. They can't have absentees and so on when they're operating with such a narrow margin. But it's there, the mechanism is there, but it's going to be a real challenge to keep all those cats in the same herd, if you will.
This is where the people really matter, because what we saw with the voting on the Laken Riley Act to crack down on people who violate our laws, and the guy who attacked, murdered Laken Riley, is that we increased the number of Democrat votes on that. Because I think people realize the American people have spoken. So everybody out there listening needs to get your member of Congress's number on speed dial, because they will react. We've seen it in the past. Mm-hmm. If we're involved, we can really turn votes. And if you're in an area where someone's less likely to be a Republican, and you still call and say, hey, this is impacting my life, I want you to vote this way. And that's where we really need to get grassroots Americans involved the way they were in the campaign, make their voices heard on all kinds of issues, because that's the only thing that will flip these votes.
Well, and to that point, there's a couple of different ones, but we are in a place where we've got transformation of the electorate. We have increased, Donald Trump got more Hispanic votes than the left certainly anticipated, made some marginal increases in black votes, particularly with black men. The blue-collar vote, particularly private sector blue-collar vote, is flowing even more heavily towards Donald Trump, union or non-union. There's been a transformation in how the electorate looks at things, and the members of Congress know that. They feel that, and they don't know what to do about it. They don't know how they should react to it. So members who are in districts who are, even marginally up for grabs are going to be much more sensitive to calls, because they don't know the political environment that they got elected in, perhaps 4 years ago, 6 years ago, 10 years ago, no longer exists, and they're going to have to deal with it. The second point, and this is where the Biden administration has been very smart, they pulled things like the education regulation that was under attack. They pulled that would have basically said, gee, your local school has to transgender your kids. They pulled that for a very specific reason, because if Congress, and they would have, did use the Congressional Review Act to eliminate it, it could never be done again administratively, because an act of Congress supersedes the administration. So they're pulling their most controversial ones off, and we're calling it a victory because they're pulling them. and it is sort of, but it's actually a strategy to hold them for the future so Congress can't overtly vote them down and kill them forever. And so a lot of this stuff, there's a real game of three-dimensional chess being played here on the regulatory end, and we have to be smart and understand that in some cases it's in our interest to be able to have Congress vote them down, because when Congress votes it down, it has the force of law, whereas administrators have to follow the law. So that is so it's really kind of an interesting game that we're going to be playing the next 3 months, 6 months, and and quite honestly, the single most important thing that people out in the real world can do is tell your congressman to fight for the individual freedom agenda and fight to restrain the administrative state, fight for lower taxes, and fight for less government, fight to drain the swamp. Those are incredibly important things, and your Congress member, whether they're conservative, moderate, or liberal, doesn't know the political environment they're in, so there's a great chance that for once they might even listen to you.
With that in mind, and you mentioned about some of the Democrats coming over and supporting the Lincoln-Riley Act, do you think, you can all pull out your crystal balls, and do you think that some of the Democrats may come over because we're in a new environment? We're in a new electoral environment, and the people have stepped up. They have spoken, and you can see it by the election of President Trump. Do you think some of the Democrats will come over, and I don't know if you've been watching Fetterman.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
And Common said he wants a successful presidency. Why? Because that gives us a successful country. Do you think some of the Democrats may come over and help with?
I hope so. I hope so. And on the men and women's sports issue that the Biden administration pulled back, Senator Tuberville actually has a bill to make that law that men can't be in women's sports. And I think with the rep from Massachusetts who was like, well, he's a Democrat.
Seth Moulton.
Seth Moulton was like, I don't want men in women's sports. He's like a Fetterman on this. So we are seeing this realignment. Now is the time to act, to bolster them and say, yes, vote the way your constituents want you to, not just the way your party does. And I think they're testing the waters. Is it okay to come over and vote on some of these very, very popular issues? Like Fetterman saying, I want Trump to have his nominees. That used to be the case, that the other party would vote for the opposite party's nominees. And so I think if we can get back to the day where we're voting on policy and what's right for the country and not just by party, it would be a very good thing.
So are we getting back to the days of, let's say, John F. Kennedy? A more moderate Democrat?
Yeah, I think definitely the pendulum is swinging such that the American people have given a bill to Congress that we want this. We're requiring you guys to do this. Whether or not Congress reacts to it in a positive way is still left to be seen. We're going to have to take some tough votes in the first 90 days. And, even if you look at the continuing resolution that came out, December 21st or 22nd, as it were, of last year, and the tight margins and party line votes almost that were there, it does seem, and it was in the same political environment that we are now. Not much has changed between December to January, except for President Trump will be inaugurated soon, and so it does seem that folks may double down and just stick in their trenches. Hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully we'll see a little bit more turning over. But when there are still tough votes to be had, Congress is going to have an entire crop of new people come in or out in the next 2 years. You hope that there's more bipartisan work, but because there are difficult decisions to be made, you may still see the purists when it comes to not expanding the debt limit, not adding more debt to the over $30 trillion that we have in debt. You may see some purists say, no, I'm not taking any vote that'll suspend the debt limit or that'll kick the can down the road in a budgetary fashion. So I hope we do see on some of these big issues a lot more working and overlap. But when it comes to tough votes, if the past month is prologue, then I do see folks still being entrenched in where they are ideologically, which may be good when it comes to strong conservatives, but on the other side, it may be difficult when it comes to raising the deficit.
Well, we've had a good discussion on this segment, and we're going to come back and talk about President Trump's nominees and how that will affect us and what our panel thinks about them actually being nominated and going back to a point that was made earlier. It used to be the case that we would go up, we went along with most of the nominees. We didn't have the argument, the heels dug in like they've been, but maybe we'll see something different, and we'll talk about that when we come back in our next segment. We're back and with our discussion here with our panel, and we left off, we mentioned the nominees. So let's talk about President Trump and his nominees for cabinet positions. Many of the people will serve in positions in the White House, and so we want to ask this question. As President Trump selected a strong team to advance his agenda, he has, I believe, and will, do you think he'll have any problem with his cabinet picks?
I will say, not to tailor the question,
over there,
but just on the point that we were making, I think the non-nominees that are going to be running DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, I think their profile has been raised quite considerably. Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, and they have a pretty big bite of the apple that they want to take on, which is reducing government by $2 trillion. So they're not a nominee. They're not going through the regular political process of being advised and consent by the Senate. But if we're talking about, really breaking up big government, they're going to have ostensibly an important role to play. They're not operating in a vacuum. A lot of folks think that government efficiency is just, this new idea. But in the past, there has been sort of bipartisan commissions. I think the last one was a deal that was struck between Boehner and Barack Obama at the time to sort of reduce government spending by, I think they had the same sort of goal, between $1 to $4 trillion. So if we're really talking about reining in government spending and slowing down spending and closing many surplus areas of the government, these two non-nominees are going to have a pretty important role. So,
how effective, not to go too far off, but I like the topic, where will that play in with the Office of Management and Budget? Won't they have to work with them, and they won't just get a carte blanche?
Well, I think they're going to work actually pretty closely together, because DOGE can suggest that cuts be made here and there, and then OMB, Office of Management and Budget, will have to carry that out and make recommendations. And in the past, the Office of Management and Budget, from personal experience, in the first Bush or the second Bush White House, they had some great ideas about cutting back government, but then the White House came in and other people came in, no, that's a favorite program, or no. Yeah. So it's good that the people who are up for OMB are fighters. Mm-hmm. And I think they're going to work closely with Vivek and Elon, and hopefully Elon and Vivek will funnel in ideas, and hopefully they will then get the public support, because some of these things are going to be controversial that they want to cut, and they're going to need to have the public support. And I think Elon showed that during the continuing resolution fight, that he could actually get the public support behind something or to kill something. And so that's really where they're going to be most helpful.
And how important will it be for President Trump's nominees to be confirmed as we work all together to try to renew our country here? Well,
first of all, to continue on that theme, Russ Vought at OMB, being the director of OMB, is the single most important nominee for restructuring government, for dealing with the regulatory state. Hegseth at Defense is important. Rubio as Secretary of State is important. They all are important in their own way, but in terms of the overall management of government and dealing with the budget crisis, there's no person who's more important than Russ Vought. And he's proven to have been able to do the job. He was at OMB in the first Trump administration. He was the acting director before that. He got attacked by Bernie Sanders for being a Christian, actually in his confirmation hearing, because he went to Wheaton College. And Bernie Sanders read the objective of Wheaton College and said, "Do you agree with this?" It was a Christian objective, and so he got attacked in his nomination hearing for being a Christian. So Russ is a tough guy. He comes out of Washington, D.C., conservative politics, and is hardcore. We're going to cut the size and scope of government. And so that's the most important person in my mind. Having said all that, Congress has a role. Okay, all the spending, The president doesn't spend $1 that Congress doesn't tell him he can spend. And so Congress is constitutionally the people who decide whether or not you're going to eliminate a program. They're the people who decide whether or not you're going to cut the budget of a program. They're the people who decide, are we going to eliminate funding for this particular program through a rider in the appropriations bill? So the battles are going to be battles that are fought where you have to win in Congress, and the Republicans have, at best, a 2-vote majority right now, and in the House. And then the Senate, they've got a 3-vote majority that is skittish. It's called skittish. And so it's that's where it's tough. But that's where Elon Musk can come in and be helpful. I run a group called Americans for Limited Government. There's nothing he's talking about that I haven't been talking about for 15 years. The difference is he's got $350 billion in his pocket to try to convince people that these are the right things to do, and I've got 356 cents in my pocket. And so so the difference of number of zeros that he can put behind something matters in terms of public persuasion. But the fact is, there's not a single program the government has that doesn't have a constituency. And they're there for a reason. It serves a constituency, and those constituencies don't give up their goodies easily. And that's going to be a big old fight.
Marty, what do you think about that?
Well, I agree that Office of Management and Budget, OMB, is going to be very critical. Russ, as the director of it, will be very critical, but he's got a partner over there named Mark Paoletta, who's going to be the general counsel at OMB. And the two of them have some very ambitious ideas about how they can reduce spending. And Mark has been making the legal case. He's written some articles and things that he's had published to make the case as to why the president can impound funds, for instance. This is a very controversial topic, but they make the argument that if the president can do things more efficiently, if Congress, say, appropriates $1 billion for a program, but if they can provide the same services for $750 million, then why can't they save $250 million and not be forced to spend that money? Things like that they're going to try to do. What kind of maybe emergency powers does the president have, and that sort of thing. So I think they're going to press that argument as well, and that should be really interesting, and that'd be very critical to see how that all plays out. And again, that might be another example where there's some court cases dealing with what is the authority to do these things, and what might they be constrained in doing.
And which goes to the very essence of only being a one-term administration. The single biggest legacy of the Trump administration, Trump 2, will be if somebody who is like-minded to Donald Trump is elected for another term, because a lot of these court fights are going to take 2-3 years to get done, and then you get the power, but then you're out of office.
Right.
So it's really about, in some respects, laying the groundwork for the next administration to be able to finish the job. And so that's what a lot of this can be about. In terms of the Impoundment Act thing, if you remember, the reason that Trump got impeached over Ukraine wasn't really over a phone call. It was over an attempt to use the rescission power to basically say we're not spending this money that Congress authorized, and basically hold back whether or not weapons were going to be sent to Ukraine. And that was a big deal, and it's what triggered the entirety of the call between Zelensky and Trump was the catalyst. But that was the real reason why that occurred, was a battle over funds, and why Congress said, gee whiz, we have to be involved because we authorize these funds and you're not spending them. And so there is a lot of jealousy in Congress about if we authorize funds for something, we expect you to spend it that way. Trump did win a victory in terms of being able to move defense funding to the wall. Defending our country seemed logical. So the courts are kind of back and forth on that. But there's going to be a lot of very complicated words being used, like rescission and the like. Bottom line is, Donald Trump is restructuring government. And Congress has to authorize some things. And he's going to push the envelope in that restructuring in some ways that are going to cause massive legal fights and big headlines in the Washington Post. But if we don't restructure this government, we're dead because we can't afford the government we're buying.
Well, and that's what we the people voted for, right? We voted for a restructuring of government. We voted for Congress to do its job, and now was the time. So when we look at Congress, a small majority, 2 years, we don't know what's going to happen in the next 2 years. Can we accomplish some of these goals that he has, and will Congress step up in its rightful position to represent we the people and vote on these legislations and stop giving that power to the administrative state? Because right now it's a fight between the administrative state, Congress, and we the people. And we the people voted for Congress. Will we be able to do some of that in the next 2 years?
Yeah, well, I think
I'm asking you to pull out a crystal ball.
Yeah.
You know
Well, I think a pattern that has been useful that both Speaker Johnson and Majority Leader Scalise have used in the past are taking as much time as we need on the floor to pass 10 or so bills at a time. So we are an over legislative body in terms of we do pass a ton of bills. There's a lot that comes forward. But if we take on these big packages, so one, strong week is dedicated to infrastructure. Another strong week is dedicated to energy and reopening our pipelines and using energy. Another strong week is dedicated to border security. Those are big themes that I think you can then communicate to the American people. Like it's this week here in Congress, call in and make sure that you're letting your voice be heard on this one big issue, and taking it week by week, step by step is I think a practical way that Congress can do it, that the people can still feel like they're involved. If we are passing sort of piecemeal fixes here and there that really are so voluminous and so confusing to the American people that they don't know where to buy in, I think Congress will, unfortunately, as government does, still give more of a stiff arm to the American people and say, oh no, we've got it taken care of over here. We're doing it here. Just sort of stay in your silos. We'll handle it here. If we're having some of these big themed weeks or big initiatives that we're communicating often to the people, I think that's a better way for the people to be more involved in what Congress is doing. And going to the point about Elon Musk having these deep pockets, and he's actually made the comments that if some of these legislators or this Congress men and women don't go along with it, he's going to spend money to run somebody against them. How effective do you think that'll be in moving our policies forward?
Well, I think one of the things to remember when it comes to Elon Musk is he hasn't spent a lot of time in D.C. or in the legislature. So, he was threatening to primary some people who didn't vote for this one bill, but there were some real objections in that bill.
Right.
And so, I think what's more important is people communicate with their own member of Congress. Listen to, he's an educator, but people need to listen to their own member of Congress, communicate with them. I'm a little hesitant about giving him the authority to decide who gets primaried and who doesn't, if those members are listening to their constituents. And so constituents, you have to communicate with your member of Congress so that they can do what you want them to do.
By the way, that's a really important point. When it comes down to it, Elon Musk has one vote. I am very glad that he is now taking a hard look about government efficiency. I would love it if his government efficiency focus was also on the technological ways to make it so we can do things that have to be done in government with a lot fewer people, saving lots of money. That would be a very good use of his technological knowledge and capacity. And truthfully, there's a lot of things that need to be fixed. And, if he doesn't have to look that far to find them. They're scouring everything. And the fact is, Americans for Limited Government, Heritage Foundation, others have been putting out all those things that need to be fixed for many, many years. And it's not, you don't really have to do all that much research to see where there's real problems and what could be done.
And as you can see, this is a robust discussion. And really what it boils down to is we want freedom, we want limited government, and we the people have to continue to be engaged. What we don't want is we the people, we get the administration in, we get the Congress and the president we want, and then we step back. and wait. We have to stay engaged in the process. So thank you for being with us here at Cure America with Star Parker, and we will see you the next time. And I like to end it this way. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will direct your path.